My bitrate too low? When what's it complaining about? Doing bitrate of 13,500. Yeah, it seems stable to me. Holy moly, maybe not. No, it's awful. Oh, there, it's clear up now.
Yeah,
Yeah,
he was fighting it, so anyway. Yeah,
yeah.
he's okay.
Thanks. You too. Oh, I see what's going on. If I, for example, go into this link, it is extra quality, and it doesn't seem to be too bad. This stuff. It was just I need to get some form of audio capturing going. Green. Music on YouTube live here. Goodbye, real music. Apparently, I'm not allowed to use that. Copyright-free background music. That can be my background music as well. All right. Printing isometric. Oh. Hey, stop it. Hey, stop it. Stop.
Here's how to make isometric pixel art. The most important thing to remember is the 2x1 pixel rule. Take a staircase going up 2 pixels, copy paste this, flip horizontally, copy paste that, flip vertically, there we go, a single isometric tile, now we can start a grid. There are different variations, flip vertically, there we go, a single tool. Take a staircase going up 2 pixels, copy paste this, flip horizontally, copy paste that, flip vertically, there we go, a single isometric tile, now we can start a grid. There are different variations of the isometric grid. 2 pixel base, 3 pixel base, 4 pixel base. This one even has extra pixels at night. For a good reason. You can even have 5, 6, 7 pixel bases if you want. It's really up to you. If we first compare the 2 pixel base 3 pixel base and you want to make a cube, which I'll show you in a minute. Notice how in the 2 pixel version we have to decide which side to put the edge on. But in the 3 pixel base we're giving ourselves easy center line. This is really just a style choice. If you're doing 3 mode, you can choose whatever style you think looks best. But if you're making isometric tiles for a game, 4 pixel base with extra pixels in height is a common base used for game assets. This is because the tiles are really easy. You can't tell the variations, but if you try it, you left these different shape grid size, which is not what we want. To properly tell the 2 pixel base size, you'd have to cut off a pixel from the bottom, 2 pixels from one of the sides. You can imagine when you're creating grass tiles, path tiles, buildings, and maybe when you're creating a character to move on the grid, the setup is going to be a little bit more complicated and it's going to adjust the maths you're going to use in programming too. So for game day, you might want to go with this. You're all left with a large square in the section area, which might not look as clean, but it tiles really easy. And if you keep the sizes in powers of 2, it'll make your life a whole lot easier as well. You can create whatever grid setup looks best to you. The larger the grid size, the more detail you're going to be able to fit in the space. Challenge 1. Create an isometric grid using any variation you want. For the purposes of this video, we're going to stick to the 2 pixel base grid. Here's some isometric art from the community. It's a chill creative space where we do regular challenges and help each other learn. Check out the links in the description to join. Making a cube is simple. Draw your base from the grid, copy and paste this, and increase to the height that you want. Connect the sides and draw your edge. You can render the cube in any style you want. Outlines, no outlines, colored outlines, highlights, there's a lot of options. The cube is the fundamental building block, which you can use to create other things like half cubes, steps, ramps, walls, simply by adjusting the height and moving things around. Challenge 2. Create a cube in your grid in whatever style you want. Why not try messing around with it too? See what you can make out of a cube. To create a cylinder, we'll use a cube as a base and use the Scottish flag method. Draw a box around the top edges of the cube, draw 2 by 1 pixel lines from corner to corner, and that's how we get our Scottish flag, Scotland. Now choose some points on the diagonal lines, and with the circle or ellipse tool, if you drag from point to point, you'll get a nice ellipse that you can use on top of your cylinder. Further apart, the points you choose are, the larger the cylinder will be. If the flag's in a different layer, you can hide it, or just delete the excess. The ellipse might require some cleanup, but it's a nice base to start from that you can adjust until it looks right to you. Then copy and paste, move it down, add in the sides, and stylize however you want, just like your cube. Challenge 3. Create 2 cylinders of different sizes using the Scottish flag method. What about cylinders on the side? Well, there's a nice technique for this too. We want the ellipse to be on this face. We can use the pixel shifting technique to get a flat view of the face. So shift these 2 pixels down by 1, shift these down by 1, and these down by 1. And we have a flat view of the face. Draw a circle in that space with the ellipse tool. The smaller you make this, the smaller the final cylinder will be, and then shift it back up into the perspective. This usually requires some cleaning up, so just tweak it until it looks right to you. Copy and paste the space, move it to the other side, connect it up, and stylize how you want. Pixel shifting technique also works if you want to put designs on the side, just like this little clock here. It might be skewed at first, but once you put it in position, it should look alright. Obviously, the larger the pixel art, the more detail you'll be able to put in, and it might even be easier to clean up. Challenge 4. Use pixel shifting to create a sideward cylinder. This one is pretty odd, so don't worry if you struggle with it. Making a pyramid or cone is pretty simple. Identify a midsection of your ellipse or diamond grid shape, connect the line on top, draw the bottom to fit the grid shape, you can also make it as tall or as short as you want, stylize it in your own way. You can put on top of cubes or cylinders to create towers. Challenge 5. Make a pyramid and a cone. To make a roof, draw a 2 by 1 line along the edge, identify the midpoint and draw a vertical line there, create one side of the roof, this side I'm using a 2 pixel line, and then the opposite side, this time I'm doing it with a 1 pixel line. How you draw these lines really depends on how tall and wide you want the roof to be. Fill that in and copy and paste this to the back, join them up and stylize however you want. You can make any height roof you want, but some of the cleanest setups are the 2 by 1 pixels and this 1 pixel with the flat line on the other side. Feel free to do whatever you want. Challenge 6. Make some roofs. Adding shadow is pretty simple. First, identify the light source, form the first shadow line from the base of the object, copy and paste that to the other side, fill that in. Make sure you shape the planes according to the light source. The plane that receives the most light will be the lightest, in this case, the top plane of the cube. The side receives less light, so it's darker, and the back plane is in shadow. That will be darkest. Notice that it's the height of the light that will dictate the length of the shadow. If you increase the height of the light, it will reduce the cast shadow from the box because more of the surrounding area is lit up. Obviously, if you change the position of the light, the position of the shadow will also change. Make sure your shading represents that change in position too. These planes are now both in shadow. If the light is in an awkward spot and you're not sure of the direction of the shadow, you can just draw a line from the light source going through a corner of the object. Copy and paste this for the other corners, join up the ends from the base of the object, and then fill that in. Making sure to change your plane shading if necessary. Challenge 7. Add some light and shadow to a cube. Now you have a whole bunch of isometric construction techniques that you can use to block out the scene and take to a final piece. Which brings us nicely to the final challenge. Create an isometric house scene using all the techniques that I've put. Here's my process on how I would attempt this. First, you need an idea. While you're searching for inspiration online, make sure you can do that freely and safely with help from this video's sponsor, NordVPN. Block malware-ridden websites easily accessed with just what you use every minute. Additional months with thanks to NordVPN for references. I did a medieval-style house or tower in mind, so I found some formal references to help spark some ideas. Then started off with this grid in 240 pixel by 240 pixel canvas. Grid size is 80 pixels by 9 pixels. Then roughly sketched out my idea, which developed into having these floating platforms everywhere. I then constructed all of the isometric parts using all the techniques that I've just shown. It's not always about what's technically right, it's about what looks right to you. I started detailing things and adding in surrounding areas. This was a very relaxing process. I wasn't sure what colours to make it at first, so I did some colour mix. A saturated, colourful daytime scene, purple and yellow complementary colour nighttime variation, and the final orange and blue dominant daytime scene, which is the one I decided to go with because it gave off this warm and inviting feeling and the kind of vibe I wanted to go. Then put in all the flat colours, changed the outline from black to a dark blue to make it softer and less contrasting. I added in a new layer for shadows, thought the light source would be the sun from the very far left, and I tried to find that throughout in the shadows. The scene was actually quite complex, so I decided to jump in Blender to quickly mock it up in 3D to get a better understanding of how the light and shadows were supposed to be. After that, I just kept playing with the little details. Tried to keep the focus around the main wizard tower by adding the most details in that area. I wasn't happy with the clouds surrounding the piece. It looked a bit claustrophobic, so I scrapped all that and finished the piece off. Added lumber into the scene, my little dwarf character from previous tutorials, and added some vines onto the tower to make it look a little bit more dated. Let me know what process you used for your work in the comments. Thanks for watching everyone, and I'll see you in the next video.
Hey guys, welcome back to a guide to making indie.
In this video, you will learn how 2D isometric games function, how to make art for such games, and understand how the movement works in isometric games. Also, I will break down the common problems that you might have if you're developing an isometric game, and come up with possible solutions for them. My name is Tamara, and welcome to my channel. Hey, it's Tamara.
Harry, turn off the TV. We're resuming this manually. Oh, that's cool. Alright. I'm going to... Let's work on this thing. Going... One brown egg. Green dot. Blue. See what it comes up with. I didn't ask for background.
here. We all love isometric games, right? For some people, they remind them of the old times when they were younger and played them. For others, it is a matter of aesthetics. Isometric art gives us the opportunity to capture an object from three sides, whereas outer perspectives don't have such privilege. That's why game genres like city builders, RPGs, and real-time strategies so often use this type of camera view. You can see a lot more details about an object while maintaining the game in 2D. Although that's not always the case. Some games use a 3D world and seeing it from a certain point creates the illusion of isometric graphics. Also, developers like to combine 3D models with 2D graphics in isometric perspective. Actually, I've already made a video on this topic that you might be interested in. You can watch it on my channel if you'd like to get a more in-depth overview of the three different approaches that you can use to make an isometric game. In this video, we will cover more general things related to classic 2D isometric view. Before we move on, subscribe to my channel to see more content like this. And also, I want to remind you that I have a Patreon page where you can support me and get some extra content like source code and project files. Let's talk about great examples of isometric games that were made in 2D. These are all older games that were released a while ago. The reason for this is that newer isometric games mostly use 3D plus 2D approach because it is more convenient to work with for a number of reasons. Stay tuned to find out what the problems with 2D isometric are. Our first true isometric game is Theme Hospital, the older versions of course. It is a business simulator where you play as a hospital owner. It was originally released in 1997 after 2 years.
Idea of how this would look.
The idea came from another successful isometric game
Then
called Theme Park.
probably
And they
completely
actually
redraw it.
a lot of code from there. Yeah, that's what developers usually do. Make one game and use code again. If you're a newbie, that's something you should learn quickly. Anyway, these games both have kinda dark sense of humor. Perfect for those videos where a YouTuber tries to turn it into an insane hospital. Leave me a comment if you know who I'm talking about. In the game, you have to build an environment that will attract patients with chemical diseases and then treat them while tending to their needs. Starting with an empty hospital, the player must build rooms and hire doctors and nurses. Since this game has a lot of furniture to place, isometric was the right choice here. Our next game title is Super Mario RPG. By the way, Theme Hospital was a tycoon game, and this one is an RPG, just like I said at the beginning of the video. These genres are suited for isometric view. In RPGs, the players have to see their characters, and one of the best ways to show their full image is to choose isometric perspective. Top-down or side view just
Almost
doesn't give
perfect.
the same amount of details. Moreover, it gives the player a sense of dimension, a feeling of a 3D object. That's why it's even called fake 3D. So, what is the isometric view and how do we create it? Let's start with a simple cube. It's a 3D model which we can view from different sides. If we rotate it to certain angles, we start seeing three sides of it. But this doesn't really look like isometric cube, right? And the reason for this is that in real world, we have perspective. It is the effect the atmosphere has on the appearance of an object as it is viewed from distance. And since game engines try to replicate physics from real world, we see the same distortion in models. But unlike in reality, in programs we can change camera projections from perspective to orthographic. Now, see how it transforms the look of our view? That's what isometric is. Overall, there are three types of projections that have three visible sides. People often confuse them with isometric projection. As you can see, they look similar, and you might have seen them in games. You can tell that Fallout is made in trimetric projection. By the way, the easiest way to understand what isometric angles were used in the game is to look at square tiles. And speaking of tiles, I will now use them to explain how isometric art is drawn. The difference between these three is angles. So the thing is, standard isometric projection uses three equal angles of 120 degrees. Fewer games use graphics like this. Usually the graphics have a 2:1 ratio. It looks like you squeezed the previous isometric tile to half of its original height. Other projections that I talked about are a bit more difficult, so game devs like us usually don't use them. They bring complications with user input, movement, and art, whereas in terms of aesthetic feeling they look pretty similar. Now, enough with the theory, let's talk more about practical stuff. We'll start by curating art for our isometric games. In order to make isometric graphics, you need to have a base, an isometric grid. In Illustrator, there is a way to create it automatically, but if you work in a simple program, I will explain to you how to make one. First of all, create a regular square grid. Then rotate it to 45 degrees and scale its height to half of the original size. When you have your grid, you can start painting on it. Right shapes that are similar to a cube are easy to draw. You just follow the grid and make sure that lines are parallel. With more complex shapes, it's more difficult, especially if you're not an artist. Unless you have a set of isometric graphics that you can use in your game, you'll have to stick to simple shapes. But let me tell you a secret, but shh, don't tell anyone. I'm kidding, you can't tell. You can just use top-down graphics as isometric in some cases. Things like trees can be easily imported into an isometric game since in their shape rotation is not very important. Also, it's possible that you'd have to scale the height down. So yeah, that's the secret about isometric graphics. There are some good tutorials on YouTube on how to make isometric art, but I think after you try to make a few shapes following the grid lines that we made earlier, you'll get it, and it will be smooth sailing from that point. One thing I want you to remember is that at first the art won't be perfect. Start with simple shapes and gradually increase difficulty. Now, when we have the graphics, we can talk about another important thing that you have to deal with if you decide to go for an isometric game: movement. You might wonder, why I didn't mention isometric coordinates? Well, good question. Unity offers an option to create an isometric game that has the functionality that we need to work with coordinates. I know you people don't like Unity's tile maps, but trust me, it is easier to figure it out than to write a whole system from scratch. Also, if you'd like to see a video on the topic of isometric tile maps in Unity, give this video a thumbs up and comment below. Even though I said that you can use the game engine's feature, the isometric movement is still on you. And please, don't be afraid of it. This will not involve matrices and all those unnecessary conversions from one system to another. This is simple. Let's begin with establishing the movement directions. Vector 2 has the necessary static fields for this: up, down, right, left. But these coordinates will move your object to top-down directions, and that's not what we want. Let's look at what I did here. Take an isometric grid with sizes 2 to 1. To move to another tile, you have to change both x and y coordinates of an object's position. You can see that you have to move to half of the cell size on both sides. We can save this value in a vector which we will use as one step. When we want to move to a certain point, the next tile to be exact, we just have to add the current position of an object or subtract. So you probably didn't even think much about it previously. Inside you just have to change the depth, or as it is called in Unity, sorting order in layer of objects sprite, and you're good to go. But in isometric, you don't have that flat edge. Instead, you have a triangle, which is supposedly on the same level, but not for the logic of a game engine. One way to fix things is to set the pivot point of the sprite to the bottom of it. However, that doesn't help in all cases. If your object is a bit longer, with more rectangular shape, like a brick, then things get even worse. For this case, you'd need to create a script for sprite sorting, or like other game developers, resort to switching to another approach. Another difficulty that is waiting for you if you decide to make an isometric game is isometric art. And I'm talking about character animation. Unless you're a really skilled artist or your characters are basic sheeps, drawing characters is just too complicated. Don't worry, it is still possible to solve. You can capture a 3D model from a certain angle and make sprites out of it. That's what I did in my Fantasy Town simulation game. It is called Lost in the Philippines, and I have a series of devlogs about the whole process of development. You can watch it on my channel. I talk about a lot of useful things there about making an isometric simulation game. Anyway, I just want to say that isometric view in general is not that complicated. Considering that you now know how isometric games work, you can start making your own dream game. Don't be shy to ask me about tutorials on this topic. I would be glad to help you.
Okay, so a few months ago I posted my first developer book on this channel, in which I shared the beginning of development on my dream game, a casual cozy isometric fishing game inspired by titles like A Short Hike, Stardew Valley, and Beastward. And the amount of positive feedback and support I received from you guys on that video was really incredible, and I just want to say thank you to all of you for joining me on this journey. I'm really excited because in this video we'll take a look at all the progress I've made over the last few months and how the game has completely changed since the last video. We'll talk about the journey to reach this point, because trust me, there have been quite a few challenges along the way, about the future plans for the game, and I've also got some really exciting announcements to make later on. Hey everyone, and thanks for joining me for another devlog for Hoop. It's Wednesday morning, I've just finished making myself a cup of coffee and got down to my computer. So in our last devlog we kicked things off by creating a quick mock-up of the game, because it was an easy way for us to get a general idea of how the game might look. And after importing those assets into Unity, we jumped right into building a simple version of the main scene where players will be spending most of their time. But I'll be honest, the art we used was just some basic shapes slapped together. You guys were really nice and supportive anyway, and said it looked great, which I really appreciate. But I think it's time to take it to the next level and make it even better. So I started off by gathering a ton of references from artists that admire and games that inspire me, and began creating some simple stuff like terrain, grass, rocks, and so on. But I quickly realized that the game lacked an art style. And so creating assets that not only looked good but also felt cohesive and matched my vision turned out to be quite challenging and time-consuming. In fact, it took me a few weeks and multiple iterations until I finally had something I was happy with. And the thing is that I tend to be quite self-critical, which has its advantages because it constantly pushes me to improve, but on the flip side it also means that I often find myself getting stuck in a loop trying to perfect what I'm working on. Despite all of that, I managed to get our island looking like this, and honestly I think it looks a lot better. Of course, there's always room for improvement, and as the game development continues, the art will naturally change and evolve. That's to be expected. And actually, we're gonna come back later in the video, improve these assets, and create even more. But now that I have some art in place, I started thinking about gameplay. I have a whole list of features I want to implement, including a complex fishing system, the ability to collect, store, and sell items, raise animals, grow, and throw. If you remember this, that would work perfectly in a top-down game, just don't make sense in Hoop, where the art is storing isometric. But like from our last level, we stopped when it came to adding collisions to our map, which can be tricky because simple box collectors that would work perfectly in a top-down game just don't make sense in Hoop, where the art is storing an isometric perspective. Now finding a solution should have been pretty much straightforward, but since I haven't done with isometric perspective before, it didn't seem that way. I was a little bit scared, honestly, and my initial reaction was to avoid colliders altogether. And that may sound strange because we built to prevent a player from walking through buildings, trees, fences, and all that stuff. Well, here's the solution I came up with. What if instead of using WASD to control the character, we implement a new system where you have to select a tile on the map with your cursor in order to move around. The character would then find the shortest path to the selected tile and start moving towards it using the grid from our tile. Okay, but what about those tiles with props on them? Well, we would give those a block property that the packet code to obvious to me. There are no levels. And while it's true that every player will come up with a general strategy for earning more, improving relationships with other characters, building their place, or simply deciding how to spend their day, those are not things that need constant attention. So from the moment you click on a tile to the moment your character gets there, they're left staring at the screen waiting. But the last thing you want in a video game is to take away the player's input and have them just watch the screen without participating in any way. And now that I think about it, it all makes sense, though before implementing the system, those things were not that obvious to me. But now I was faced with a big decision. Either keep the existing setup, accept it as it is, and move on to the next task, or throw a month's worth of work out the window and spend more time implementing a WASD movement system and dealing with collisions and sorting problems that come with it. And it wasn't an easy decision at all, because I spent so much time working on the system, but in the end I realized that coding onto something that didn't fit the game would only harm the project in the long run. And even though it can be hard, sometimes it's better to just let go of the work you've done rather than damaging what you're working on. So I made a goal to start over, and here I was, once again, back to square one. This time, however, I felt more confident because I had a clear understanding of what my game needed, and that you can't just borrow mechanics from other games without thinking about whether they would fit here or not. So I started by bringing back the script that allows us to move our character in 8 directions using the WASD keys, and after that I spent some time polishing the animations I mentioned earlier and imported them into the game. And honestly, I think this new character looks a lot better than what we had before. It's definitely cuter. Still a little bit rough around the edges, but as my pixel art skills improve, we'll definitely come back and make adjustments. sense. Now it's important to keep in mind that once we implement the character creation system, players will be able to customize their character's appearance from hair, skin color, clothing, and so on. I think that would be a great way to let the players express themselves. And speaking of expression, while working on the character design, I also began experimenting with facial expressions, which I thought could be incredibly useful in the future for cutscenes and various interactions throughout the game. But I was a little bit unsure whether the character's face should have a mouth or not, so I reached out for feedback. And after reading what you guys had to say, which was a lot of great feedback, I ended up choosing to keep things more clean and clear by not including one, even though we can still use them in certain cases where it makes sense in order to better sell an emotion. Now going back to the player's character for a second, if you don't want to create a custom one, you'll have the option to play as Mandy, the game's main character. Here's a chibi version of Mandy, but we're gonna come back to her in a bit and show you some digital art I've created that should give an even better idea of the character design, which of course was used to create these chibi emotes for our Discord server and will also be the basis for her in-game pixel art. But now that I finally had the character in the game, I began working on implementing collisions, and to my surprise, it wasn't as difficult as I had initially thought. What I needed to do was use polygon colliders, which allowed me to create custom shape colliders for each sprite regardless of its shape. But when it comes to sorting objects in isometric games, things are not as straightforward as in games that use a top-down perspective, and here's why. In 2D games, we usually sort sprites based on a pivot point, most of the time located at that base where that object would touch the ground. For instance, if my character's pivot point is positioned above the pivot point of this rock, the game renders my character behind them. But if the position is lower, then the character appears in front. And that's a great way to sort 2D sprites, but unfortunately it doesn't work quite as well in an isometric perspective. And that's because on larger sprites we can't really define where our object will touch the ground using a single point, and there's no such thing as having multiple pivot points. Now one possible solution would be to split all the large sprites into smaller pieces, each with its own pivot point. But that approach would be not only inefficient, but also very inconvenient when designing the map or building once the building system is implemented. Just imagine having to place 20 individual sprites on the map for a single house instead of one. It's just not practical. And because D&D doesn't offer a built-in solution for handling 2D isometric sorting, I began doing some research, and here's how I ultimately solved that. With the help of a script, each object in the game is now sorted based on either a point or a line defined by 2 points. And the line acts just like a pivot point, but instead of comparing the character's position relative to a point, we compare it relative to a line. And that works incredibly well and actually solves all of our sorting problems. Now one of the things I really wanted for this game to have was a way to track the time within the game, allowing us to have days, months, and years pass. And having a way to tell the time will not only make the player feel more immersed in the game's world, but it will also allow us later on to create routines for NPCs, make businesses automatically open and close at specific times, and so much more. Now implementing this was pretty straightforward. As long as the game is not paused, we count the seconds that pass and increment the minutes, hours, days, and so on. However, I didn't want the day to last 24 hours like in real life, so I made a few adjustments to the code where each in-game minute now lasts 0.7 seconds instead of 6. This effectively shortens an in-game game to about 6.5 minutes, which I think works a lot better. But we definitely don't want players feeling like they're constantly racing against the clock. And when a minute goes by in less than a second, seeing the time in UI playtime becomes super stressful. Suddenly, instead of enjoying peaceful morning at the lake, players will be constantly reminded by the UI that time is passing and they need to move on to other tasks. To fix this, I changed the code, so now the UI only updates every 5 in-game minutes, making it look a lot better and less overwhelming. And I wrote the code in such a way that it can easily be updated, so if we decide later on that the days will be longer or shorter, we can definitely make that change. And even though the UI isn't our main priority right now, I went ahead and added the calendar into the purpose. If while the board is on the ground, the player gets too close and then there's a circle around it, the board will get scared and fly away. This way you can watch them, but you'll have to be careful and keep some distance to avoid scaring them. Later on we could add more complex behavior such as having them move around or get closer to other birds that might be nearby and so on. But for now I think they're really cute and they do their job of bringing the game to life a little bit. And the reason I say a little bit is because the only problem we have here is that these birds are not always around. You might see one here and another there, but they don't spend so much time around before flying away. So it was the perfect time to add a new animal, chickens. I first went outside, took some photos as references, and then started working on the pixel art. And these chubby chickens are what ended up. They're really cute. All those things we got so far are great, they really make the game nice. So next I began designing the map using both the assets we created earlier and some new ones as well. And after placing everything in the scene, I went back to bird spawner and added some chickens around. Now it's important to note that these chickens won't remain here forever, because even though you will see them and other animals on the farms of other characters, if you decide to raise animals to get eggs, milk, and so on, you'll have to purchase your own. But okay, so at this point the thing is already. Now this game is a passion project, something very special to me. So I'm doing my best to make sure that the game is coming along nicely and that you guys like it. That's why sometimes I get stuck on perfecting the smallest things because I'm trying to get the best out of me. The game has come a long way since the last development when all we had was basically a mock-up. There's been a lot of trial and error, especially with the art, but I'm extremely happy with how it looks now and excited for what's coming up in the next devlogs. There's more progress that has been made than would have shown in this video, and here's a small sneak peek of that. I just didn't want this video to get too long, so I've decided to keep the rest for the next one, which will come out really soon. Now working on the game comes with challenges because I'm doing everything on my own, from taking care of the art, coding, game design, writing, YouTube, and so on. I love it, but it takes a ton of...
So 8 is half. Okay, export that, and we can easily start painting them here. And like magic, it just works. It's really not that complicated. If you love indie tales, be sure to subscribe.
I share a bit of what I'm working on, as well as teaching you everything you should know about designing your own indie games. Today, I want to show you how I make isometric tile sets for my game Reality Box. We've talked about tile sets a bunch before, but let's do a quick recap so we're all on the same page here. Tile sets are basically the puzzle pieces of level design. Making art for levels is very time-consuming, so instead of drawing everything individually by hand, having a palette full of versatile level pieces is a great way to speed up the process of making levels. Previously, we made a tile set for platformer where each tile represents a piece of the floor, or walls, or background elements, but today we're taking these things a step further with isometric tiles. Now, a lot of those lessons from the first tile set we made will still apply here, so I highly recommend checking out that video first, but with a new perspective and art style comes a lot of new rules. It's one thing to draw a two-dimensional world, but turning those drawings into something that resembles 3D is pretty tricky. Don't worry though, after today's video, I feel confident that you'll have everything you need to know before you dive into making your own isometric style game. But first, hey, I'm Apex Fox and I make game design related videos every week. If you learned something new in this video and want to see more, consider subscribing. We'd love to have you. So first and foremost, if we want to make an isometric style game, we have to understand what that actually means. Isometric is a camera perspective that allows you to create seemingly 3D objects in a 2D space without a vanishing point. What this means is that no matter where the camera is positioned, all isometric tiles and objects will always look exactly the same. It's basically forced 3D in a 2D space. Every art style has its own strengths and weaknesses, so let's figure out if isometric is right for you. Starting with the strengths, isometric is perfect for grid-based games. If you're making a tactics RPG like myself, or maybe a puzzle game, isometric has pretty much everything you'll need. However, the same could be said for standard top-down perspective, which is something to consider, but it's kind of undeniable how cool it is to see 3D objects represented in 2D, so for me that's the main deciding factor. Now time for some of the drawbacks, and these are things you might not even consider before starting an isometric project. First of all, player movement can end up being very restrictive if you're not making a grid-based game. If all the tiles are diagonal from each other, chances are the player is also moving diagonally, which is very weird to control with arrow keys or a D-pad. Of course, there are workarounds for this problem. We've seen it done in games like Hades or Tunic, but that calls for either 3D character models or drawing 8 different directions for the character to move. And I feel like I don't need to explain to you why that's still kind of a challenge to pull off. Not only is the art style very restrictive for action games, but it's also just harder to make in general. Like, how can you layer 2D blocks behind each other? How can you set the correct pivot points so objects and characters on top of blocks render correctly? I'll show you more of what I mean when we start actually making the tiles, but it's good to fully understand what you're getting yourself into. Either way, I find isometric tiles really fun to make, so let's just start making them. We're going to start by making a standard block tile. Every block tile is made up of 3 evenly sized diamonds, 2 for the sides and 1 for the top. The top diamond is what's most important here. That's where the player will stand, and when we start layering those tiles together, the top diamond is pretty much all that's left over. Now I'll show you how to make these blocks. The most important thing I teach right out of the gate is what I like to call the isometric rule of 2. Everything we do going forward will be based on this rule, so I hope you're paying attention. To make a perfect cube in pixel art, we start by drawing lines like this. 2 pixels, then 2 pixels, then 2 pixels, then 2 pixels, you get the idea. This line is what we use to create not only the diamond surface of a block, but also the base at the bottom. Then we have the vertical lines which close off the block, and there you go. The best way to think about these two different kinds of lines is that 2x2 lines are for flat surfaces, and the vertical lines represent heights. The reason we don't use straight horizontal lines of 1s or lines of 3 pixels is because the diamonds don't end up being the same size, which is fine, but it's not exactly isometric.
But
There you go. If you draw each line like this, you end up with a 32 by 32 pixel isometric cube. What I like to do before anything else is define a light source for the block. This is really simple. As you can see, I decided the light source would be in the top left. So we use the brightest color for the top, a slightly darker color for the left side, and an even darker shade for the right. After that, you can add some shading and highlights to the outlines, and you pretty much have a working tile set already. It might be a little basic looking, but this is really all you need to start building levels. Normally, we would make the levels in a game engine that aligns everything for you, but for the sake of this video, I'm just copy and pasting more blocks. You also notice that when we layer blocks together, we still maintain that rule of 2, and this is essential for making a grid. Staying consistent with this rule of 2x2 is probably the most important part of isometric tile sets. If a single block is 1 pixel off, it will ruin the grid entirely. Now that we have one tile done, we can start making variations. I started with a half slab, which is literally just half as many vertical pixels high as a full block. You can also make sloped tiles, and these can be a bit inconsistent with how they slope, but as long as the base is the same dimensions as a regular tile, that still shouldn't be a problem. Using all the same rules we went over before, vertical lines being heights and diagonal lines being the block surface, you can make a ton of these variations, and having options like this will make your levels a lot more versatile. I threw together this small test object just to show you how all these tiles work together. The main idea here is literally just to follow your guidelines and continue the 2x2 pattern. You can stack blocks by placing the base directly on the tile lines, and it's important to know one of the biggest challenges of making isometric art, which is layering. If you want tiles to not become a jumbled mess, you have to start in the back and work your way forward. You gotta remember that these actually aren't 3D objects, these are 2D drawings. So if you want to add something, you have to draw on top of it. That's why pretty much all isometric games make their levels raised towards the back and slope down to the front. It makes layering this stuff way easier later down the road. I have to mention again, this isn't really a problem if you're making a level with game engine tools, but if you're just drawing isometric for fun, it's just something to think about. So now that you know how to make the very basics of an isometric tile set, the only thing we're missing is detail. Right now you're watching a time-lapse of me making my own tile sets, but I'll explain how I make those details as we go. I decided I wanted to make a sewer dungeon scene, so I just started with some basic floor tiles to build off of. You'll notice that when I detail lines on top of the block, everything is that same 2x2 pattern. Like I said before, making isometric tile sets is really all about following that pattern through everything you do. It's either 2x2 lines or vertical lines to show heights. I know I sound like a broken record, but it really is the most important part of all of this. There actually are some exceptions to this though. You'll see I drew a circle-ish shape on one of the tiles. Curved lines are very weird to pull off in this perspective. I personally just eyeball it until it looks okay. I did some more curved lines later, so you'll see those on the walls for like door frames and stuff like that. But yeah, similar to what we were doing before, I'm just doing a whole bunch of shapes that we can use as building blocks to put the scene together. And now that it's time to start actually building the scene, I'm gonna say this again, it's so important to find your guidelines in order to make sure everything lines up correctly. There were multiple times while making the scene where I had to redo a big chunk of it because things didn't actually line up correctly. And you'd be surprised how much one pixel can change. One thing that definitely helps me is separating the scene by different layers. I had one layer for the back left side, another layer for the water, and a layer for the bricks in front of the water. You get the idea. Similar to the platformer tile set I made, contrast helps a lot when separating elements of the scene. Although the floors and walls are using the same gray color palette, I went a few shades darker for the walls just to make sure it's easy to separate them. And because I know this is a grid-based game, having a very bright, clear floor will be pretty important later down the line. I'll just remind you that game engines usually have tools that make isometric tile sets really easy to use. If you're making a game, don't do it the way I'm doing it right now within your pixel art software. because you're just going to end up with a headache and wasting a lot of time. I just wanted to show you how it works, and it's actually kind of a good way to test out your tile sets before putting them into your game. But yeah, here's the finished scene using the tile set I made. Isometric can be pretty fun, especially if you played a lot with Legos as a kid. It definitely scratches the same part of your brain. I hope this helped you guys get started on your own isometric tile sets. Leave a like or a comment to let me know. Subscribe to the channel for
both co-founders. Our researchers catch in the Twitch chat to instantly reel in the fish. It even shows the username that caught the fish and how many fish this specific viewer has already caught.
Why is this dude talking about Twitch and shops? All I've wanted to see are cool fish being caught.
Hope that we'll get word out about our game somehow. If you like this game, then you can actually play it right now. We just released our biggest demo update yet. You can find the link in the video description. We also have a small Discord community where we share progress and show off our characters and catches, so feel free to join us over there as well. I've never done a devlog before, so this is pretty new to me, and I would really appreciate if you can give any feedback on what to improve or what you guys want to see. I hope you enjoyed this, and I will see you in the next video. Ciao!
follow along. So the task is okay. So first step here is to gather some shows the ways and help you push the person. So let's keep working on some. Let's try pushing the eyes a bit shape. So let's try this website called Low Spec. Perfect here, but I'm going to try. I'm not too worried about that. Just keep pushing. Game that never got made. So let me know what you.
So you can see here, this part is the nose. You kind of need to have a few pixels to create that distinction, but once you do, it's pretty stable. Hey pals, welcome to a new video. Today we will be covering isometric pixel art, particularly isometric characters. This is something that has been suggested that I make a video about pretty frequently since I started doing isometric stuff. And since I've been working with isometric characters myself, making Throneless and working on the Ludum Dare entry and experimenting with this whole thing, I thought I would. You can see what's going on here. We've got this very sort of like chibi format, right? The shoulders are square, just how simple the actual implementation is. There are really only 2 colors per material. I think this is actually quite a good choice, mostly because these characters, being as the size that they are, if you're looking to make a game that's in this sort of tactics ratio, these characters aren't really much taller than, say, 32 pixels tall. And so I think keeping the amount of things in the character design quite simple keeps them recognizable and uncluttered. So in each of these characters, I think that's one thing that I'm getting quite good at, sort of just being intuitive about, which is just keeping the designs to a minimum. You know, your characters, as you create them for, you know, portraits or concept art or whatever, they might have lots of different elements that make up the actual design of the character. But at this scale, these are almost more like chess pieces. That's how I like to think of them, and that's how they present in games like Final Fantasy Tactics. So here, for example, you know, we have our ranger. He has a hood and cape, he has a black tunic, and he has brown shoes. Obviously, in the game, he's also carrying a bow, and each of these characters has their own weapon, and that's kind of like part of the silhouette as well. Although here, it's not part of the sprite because that's just not how it works. So the goal here was to keep these characters recognizable from both angles, and also to use the same color for all of the characters to signify which team they're on, because there was a red and a blue team. So we have the ranger, we have the witch. Now I did create these very quickly. I mean, this was, the whole thing probably took me like 2.5 hours. So just note that it's not probably my finest work, but I think working under those constraints is actually quite a useful thing because it teaches you what you should and shouldn't do. So the first really here is to say as much with as little. It's just noisy. To just doing a side-on character where the eyes look like this. Same thing with the eyes. So I'm just trying to bring in those features of hers, trying to make sure that everything's in there as it's supposed to be. Now with these kinds of characters, the eyes in like the Final Fantasy characters, what they tend to do is be, and then what I'll do is this, and legs, the arms, those need to feel separate. You know, you can even, especially the arms. And this is something that I don't think is necessarily a problem, particularly, you know, for games where this is the case, where you've got characters that can move away from and toward the player. And particularly when there are a lot of characters on screen, you do want each individual character to have a pretty clear, consistent silhouette. You want the colors to be consistent, you want the shapes to be consistent, because it allows the player to very easily recognize who they're looking at. So this is a pretty quick exercise, to be honest. Making a character that's this small shouldn't take you very long. And you can sit here playing for a long time. When I was working on these characters for Throneless, I found myself trying to limit the sprite creation process to about like 10 minutes per sprite. So I dedicated, you know, for
2 years ago, I sat down with my
characters. I really only spent like 2 hours working on all of them. That was like towards, away, kneeling sprites. So again, because these characters are so small, you know, it is something where you kind of can create new poses by taking a lot of the information and just copying it for, you know, the next frame. I would just advise that it's probably worth mocking up the character with like a silhouette first, just the blob, maybe like a shaded blobbed character, just so that you know like where the pieces are going before you start copying and pasting elements around. Okay, so as you're working with this, make sure that you don't lose those angles, right? The ones we were talking about before. So you can just always double check if you're a little bit stuck, especially on the hips here. I found it quite difficult to stay and keep this line, but you know, from the shoulders everywhere, you can basically draw that line, and you should be able to draw that and have the bottom of each of those elements line up. And if you're struggling with one area, just do that check to make sure that that's the problem, because it could be that, you know, the actual pose characters for that game. So there you have it. Thanks for watching. Customizable and with different variations. Once we're using the normal map, you'll be able to see that depending on where we place the light, the actual texture reacts in a very different way. Means I'll be able, if you have a default project, you've got a texture, it looks like this, right? So this is base to look at. Here is a guide for normal mapping as far as the colors that associate with the direction. In 3D graphics, the way that we actually represent that direction is with color. So green up here, it's up, purple is down, we've got this sort of like peachy color for the right, and we've got this teal for the left. This is for 2D. Of course, we can't see every face with a 2D game, so these are, you know, close enough. The way that you access these is by going to the normal map color wheel underneath this menu for the palette. So, changed here, and the reason is, I'm going to call this normal. With Unity textures, normal mapping is pretty straightforward. Basically, go to the sprite editor where you slice up your tile set, go to secondary textures, and then just add the normal map. That's all it is. So this is normal map, and we're going to pick isometric normal. That's it. That's the whole process. Apply that, and we're done. So, once we've set our normal map, you'll notice that nothing has changed here. And the reason is your light needs to be using the normal map. Once we're using the normal map, you'll be able to see that depending on where we place the light, the actual texture reacts in a very different way. Right? It's almost like it's a 3D object. Don't forget when you import your normal map to also create point filtering here and also turn off the compression quality, because I was noticing that my normal map was blurred when I was working on it. So make sure you don't have bilinear filtering on your normal map or on your texture. If you change the distance, then this will be, you know, different as you work. And one thing to be mindful of is, even though this is a 2D lighting system, it still works with 3D space. So if you move it away, the actual distance is based on 3D distance. So it's just something to look out for, that the Z position of these should be pretty similar. The way that you handle the actual simulated Z distance is by creating a distance value here. So this is the actual distance. And it generally works better if this is lower. So anywhere from, you know, 0 to 1 or around 100, you can go lock Z position turned off. So if you turn that off and then press plus and minus, you'll notice you can actually start offsetting, and that's for elevations. So we're actually treating this like it's a 3D grid. Even though it's 2D, we can actually get elevations out of it, and that'll help later as we're trying to do level designs with blocks that are a bit higher, and with pathing for the characters. So if the characters are moving over the blocks that are higher up will have a different Z index, and we'll be able to move a bit more smoothly that way. So the problem that I have with this is that when I want to go, you know, down or up, I want to go in full block increments. I don't want to go a little bit at a time. I want to completely jump up a whole block. And to do that, we need to change in the grid setting this number here to be closer to like 2. Okay, and now we're going up in full block increments. So we press minus to go up. It's a little bit inverted, and you'll be able to draw your elevated tiles. The problem is this looks all wrong.
basically what's happening here is there is a bit of what we call Z fighting going on. So the Z axis is not sorting out which tiles should be above what. And the reason for that is that your tile map by default is set to chunking. What chunking does is it takes all of the tiles which are on the same layer and makes it one texture. It kind of bakes it as one thing. We don't want to do that. We want each tile to be sorted individually. This takes a bit of a toll on like processing because it's a little bit more expensive, but I mean, there's no other way to do this. So set it to individual, and that will allow your tiles to be nice and separated. And you can go as high as you want now, and you can see that very clearly, you know, which tiles are above which. So now you have a tile set that is lit correctly, that has elevations, and is ready to be textured. I'm going to do some fun level design here, and we'll get back to it in a sec. Okay, so we have this lovely scene here. It's been designed as a level and looks really good. Let's say now we want to add some textures to it. That's as simple as just going back to our original graphic and giving it some texture. So what do we want this to be? I'm thinking we make some kind of, let's go for bricks. So let's go 1, 2, 3. Looking good. And I want to start applying some kind of logic to these. Now, the way that I want to think about this is basically our blocks are full at 16 pixels tall and half at 8. So I'm thinking maybe we do layers of bricks. The bricks can either be at the halfway point or I've experimented with thirds, but I think the halfway point sounds pretty good. So sections where it's not quite as obvious can be really, really helpful, especially in allowing the players to differentiate what's going on where. And of course, because we have our point lights, we can actually change this up. And now that you've got lighting in your game, you want to start thinking about how you can use it in ways that actually allow you to, you know, create interesting differences in your level design. Right? This is very easily something that could be quite repetitive, right? To represent that he's casting a shadow from here, rather than, because this is supposed to be kind of like 3D lighting, it's not his silhouette that casts the shadow, it's this little spot near his feet. Now you want to make sure that all of your lights in the game allow shadow casts. So you want to do that by increasing the shadow intensity. Now, if we take our character and we move it over to those lights, you can see he actually casts a little shadow. Isn't that fun? So there you have it. Now, you know how to make 2D, isometric, lit tile sets in Unity. And I will most certainly be returning to this style and returning to games that look like this very soon. Or having a game resolution, what you actually see, what's rendered on the screen can be something completely different, like 1080p, but what that usually subscribe here and on Twitch. We're talking about pixel art. What that means is, you know, showing you, then you need to stop and hold, understand how to recreate that stuff. Okay.
PC opened up, teach me how important a completely new way of making games, and I finally had fun working on the project again. But I made the islands, adding up algorithm fun to avoid dysfunction. Nothing fancy, but it did the trick. On top, I had also taken care of some other mechanics like a crafting and building system, as well as a provisional UI and some basic sounds, making the game feel a bit more playable. At that point, I wasn't expecting the video to perform much better than the first one, and everything felt natural to control. After trying a bit around, I ended up implementing an A-star pathfinding algorithm that made the character move towards the cell that the player clicked on. These were the only if I'm going to keep it. The game is not supposed to be a fighting game, so mobs are not that present, but you do encounter some while exploring, adding a tiny bit of danger and difficulty. Also, some monster drops are needed for certain recipes, ensuring that the player can't just always avoid them. As I told you, I was using the old pre-made chunks to generate the world, and using some tricks to make the world feel more interesting. At the same time, I added biomes to make the world feel more varied. After the latest video about the topic, I got contacted by Mochikano. She's an artist that has been helping me out by providing some game art, giving me more time to work on the development. She's an awesome artist, so if you want to check her out, I linked her in the description. Having more time for development, I used it to tackle some often requested changes. One of the most common pieces of feedback I received was about the grid and the camera shake. Many people felt the grid was too rigid or distracting, and that the camera shake was uncomfortable. I've since made both of these fully adjustable in the settings, allowing players to customize their experience. The bigger changes that I made include implementing all of the biomes into one single
kind of reflection for my look. This is very similar to things like Swift UI, which is the UI frame. Obviously, this was just a static sprite of the player, but I realized I had built out all the functionality I needed to update this sprite based on what my ability as the developer to create very realistically shaped islands and automatically populate those islands with the correct organisms based on the island's chosen biome. With the ability to now create pretty cool and very detailed islands and of course have the player sail between them, my intent was to move on to Doffin's questing system, which would of course incentivize the player to move between
involved is scaling up the art by multiples, right? So 6 times scale or 4 times scale, whatever it is. So something like 640 by 360 will multiply up to 1080p quite easily. So somewhere in this range, if you keep these elements in there, you will probably be fine. But let's go into a little more detail. So let's look at the first game, Celeste. Celeste is what I would call a core platformer. So what do I mean by core platformer? I basically mean any game where all of the things that you can do in the game are resolved by jumping on things or jumping around things or getting through the level. So there's no sword combat or like picking up objects, stuff like that. It's just, you're just moving around the screen. And in these games, the character size relative to the screen height is usually a lot smaller than in other games. It's about 10%. What this does is it maximizes the amount of gameplay that you can fit on a single screen, which allows the design to be a lot more nuanced. Okay, imagine if this character was a lot bigger, or if the screen was only like zoomed in this far. On screen, we wouldn't really be able to do much other than just fit a couple of simple jumps. And so the complexity of the level design is dependent on the character size relative to the screen. For Celeste, we've got really small proportions in general. So like we're only at the bottom end of what I would call like a comfortable resolution at 180 pixels tall for the screen size. And the tile size is also very small. It's only 8 pixels. But what this allows you to do is to make, again, very slight adjustments. This height difference between here and here lets the level design be much more nuanced. So very geometry heavy in terms of the complexity of the geometry, and lots of space per screen. That's a core platformer. Now moving over to something like a tactics RPG, this is Metal Slug Tactics. Of course, in these games, we're not doing a lot of platforming or much action at all. It's all turn-based, but nonetheless, the character sizes relative to the screen need to be quite small because we want to fit multiple enemies on screen, right? If we want to make the battles quite intense and complex and give the player lots of choices about who they should be attacking and in what order, we need to be able to fit lots of characters on the screen. So here we've got larger tiles. Keep in mind these are larger because they are isometric. So, you know, a tile like this might be like 32 pixels across, but really like the surface is like 16 pixels tall. So you can kind of half this number. The character sprites are 40 pixels tall. They're quite tall. But in the scope of a 360 pixel tall screen, that's still on the small end. We're looking at 11% of the screen size. Moving on, we've got the action, adventure, rogue, Vania genre. So this is like any game where we're doing like side-scrolling platforming where there is combat. Most of these things have to do more with gameplay loops than with the core kind of like interaction, and thus, you know, the constraints are very similar. So Eagle Island is a game in this genre, and the character here is still kind of on the small side, but at a very comfortable 12% of the screen height. I believe Eagle Island has like quite a robust camera system, and so the actual resolution can be varied depending on the platform you're playing on. But in this kind of screenshot here, I managed to work out that the screen is about 216 pixels tall. We've got the just 16 standard pixels tall tiles and 28 pixels tall for the character. I want to just draw your attention quickly between the difference between the size of a tile and the size of a character. This ratio really determines how nuanced and complex the platforming needs to be or can be. So think of it this way. If your character is less than like 2 tiles tall, then the minimum jump that your character can have is at least like just one of their height. Like there's no reason to jump any smaller than 16 pixels for this character. And so the level design tends to be quite blocky in this way. And again, for a game with like mostly action combat, this is fine. And especially because we're still in the sort of like 12% range, you can have maybe a couple of layers of platforming in one screen, and it's not too prohibitive. Next up, we have Insignia. This is my game. It's a work in progress. Don't judge the work in progress screenshots. But basically the way that I'm working with is a much taller character relative to that of Eagle Island, but the same tile size. So my game is 360 pixels tall, and my character is, as a result, only 14% of the screen size, so a little bit bigger in general than Eagle Island, but because the screen pixel density is a little higher, the character kind of doesn't look that much bigger on screen. And you can see here that the tile size versus the character size is still quite small, so the platforming can feel quite nuanced. And that kind of works its way into the game, where there's quite a lot of like parkour, jumping around on ledges and wall sliding, that kind of thing. It also means that this tends to feel quite granular, which is a challenge for me when I'm working on the game, to make the art feel still smooth and readable without it being too noisy. So then we have Momodora 3, which is very similar to Insignia in terms of the proportions, although the resolution is much smaller. So we've got 14% of the screen height for our character, and that's quite fair because both Insignia and the character from Momodora have basically the same like capabilities. They both do platforming, they both have swords, or at least sword-esque weapons, melee combat, but we've got much smaller proportions overall, and so this 16 pixels tall makes the game feel a little more blocky, a little more sort of like handheld almost, because the overall resolution is much smaller. Now we have kind of an outlier example. This is Sonic from Sonic Mania. It's basically Sonic 1, 2, and 3. The game here is scaled such that Sonic is like 16% of the screen height. That's quite a lot for a like bench eye really bottom. And it's back. You can see on the camera angles higher, so see page me like so we've talked character size relative to the screen influences how we design jump height. But as far as like a mobile game people would pay for, I think the gameplay needed to be a little more nuanced. Nonetheless, we can have a look at the character design here, and I just want to call out
Hey pals, welcome back to a new video. I hope you can excuse the lapse in communication because I've been very busy becoming a game director on Insignia, which is now a team project because it has some funding. Yes, this is true, this has happened. So basically a year and a half ago, I put together a video saying that I wanted to move towards having the game be a team project, and I put a call out for expressions of interest from composers and programmers and artists, and I got lots of applications for that. And then right around the end of last year, application and about that competitive analysis that I did, but we'll save that for another video. So suffice application and about that competitive analysis that I did, but we'll save that for another video. So was embargoed from. There's still some unfinished decision can be part of your career. What I wasn't able to, I was talking about how being a content creator can help market your game stream. I put in for the game, have you been stuck? Fantasy
is something that I can't wait. Engineering, I love design, I love pros. Thanks for your patience, thanks for your support. Please stay tuned. Now, immediately I know this isn't going to be quite right. And part of this is the depth, part of it is the color. But if we unlock this, so there's no point reuse colors where we can. More meat, then I'm a little concerned. Between these, so I'm just pretty good. And I don't mind with my style being a little messy. Hey pals, welcome to a new video. Today, I thought we'd cover a topic that has been hotly anticipated, metric games. You're diagonal from those, so north, east, southeast in a set, and there is straight up, looking straight down. And the reason why we don't do that is because, especially for characters, this leaves us with a really limited view of the character. Right, we're looking at like literally the top of their heads as opposed to some variation of that. Also, if we worked with this perspective, we actually wouldn't be able to merge these two. So if we kind of like draw a line between this idea of what top down is and pitch the camera down just slightly to something that's more like this, right? So we can see some of the side and some of the top of whatever it is we're looking at. Then we get this perspective that actually lets us integrate really well with isometric. And this is, when we talk about this 8-directional animation, this is generally what a lot of these animations are presented like, because it's so versatile and it works for most games. Now, this isn't to say that you can't have top-down tiles in your game that look like this, and then characters that are in this perspective. Mixing perspectives is quite common when there is a small degree of variation. What we're talking about here is a camera angle that's sort of like 45 degrees. It can be a little higher than 45, but essentially you want to be able to see these two faces of the cube of whatever it is you're looking at. And when that comes to characters, we're talking about looking like this. So if we were directly above, we would see just the top of the character's head. We wouldn't see much of their body, right? We'd just see the shoulders. And this is what a tile set looks like, 90 degrees. As we pitch the camera back down and sort of like pull down, we get to this sort of like 45-degree angle where, again, the head takes up probably most of the sprite, or at least like, most of the feature. And especially when we caricature, like in games like the original Pokemon series, the character's head is the majority of their body. We see some of the body, and we even see some of the legs. So it's a nice sort of middle ground. And then side-scrolling would put us here, so we're like dead even with the character. And in this context, obviously, this would be a lot harder to do 8 directions for, because what would be the difference between going this way and going this way, right? The sense of going into the background is a little less value there. So we're kind of targeting this one in the middle. So the setup here is that basically we'll be doing 5 animations. So there are 8 directions, but we can actually flip these 3 to get these 3. When we do this, the biggest challenge is really going to be, how do we match these animations? So how do we get each of the ones that we do independently? And we can't actually reuse much going between these. Like, the perspectives are so different that you are essentially animating 5 different animations when you do this. And the focus of this video is really going to be, how do we get a really nice setup that allows us to think about these things as one holistic unit, and have a workflow that stops us from accidentally sort of straying and doing things from scratch every time. So what can we keep when we set up that actually lets us minimize the amount of errors or discrepancies between these animations? I'm going to skip over to Sprite now and show you the setup. So here we are in Sprite, and I've got a character here that I drew for the isometric character design tutorial video. So picking up from where we left off, if you want to get a bit of a start on this and you haven't watched the video, then definitely check it out. I'll link it in the description. What I want to do is take the assumption that you've started with isometric. If you haven't started with isometric, that's totally fine. And if you need help designing a character, again, I've got other videos for that. But let's just say we're starting here. The goal is to determine at least our idle pose for each of the directions that we want. This can happen before we start animating or after we've animated the first animation. I'm going to do basically a simplification of this sprite for the different poses so that we don't go too far trying to add fidelity where it's not really relevant at this stage. So this is towards, this is away, and before we do anything, I really want to explain that this tile here is kind of the key to everything. What this is it's a way for me to really make sure that I'm not losing sight of the perspective of what's happening. You can see when a character is standing in this isometric perspective, right, we can see some of the top of their head, we can see different parts of the body that we might not see if we were completely side on. And the way that we govern sort of how to maintain our head in that perspective space is by following this line here. Okay, this line tells you basically, with the most primitive object, a cube that we can think of in this space, how does the camera render something that is square? And so something that's flat along the ground or parallel with the ground will, in this case, go like 2 across and then 1 up and then 2 across and then 1 up and then 2 across. So looking at the character here, they're standing straight, they're standing parallel, their hips are square with the ground. But in this case, square with the ground follows this line. And that, for basically the entire animation, is going to be our baseline, right? We want to be able to track those lines all the way across. Now, because this is pixel art, what this means is that if you're following any kind of variation to this, so maybe your tiles are more diamond shaped rather than sort of pitched down this way, you can follow the same rule, but it's going to mean more dramatic angles. And unfortunately, what that also means is that there aren't that many variations to what you can do. So it's like every 2 pixels you rise 1, or every 1 pixel you rise 1. Everything in the middle between this, you kind of get like alternating steps. So you get like maybe like 1 and then 2 and then 1 and then 2 then 1 and then 2. And you can do this. You could have a tile set that used this alternating aliased angle, but I think you would find that it would be really distracting looking at the actual sprite itself. For this example, I'm going to work with the assumption that we're on this kind of angle of the camera. I don't know if this is 45 degrees. I don't know what degree it is, but you know, we're sort of like above, we can see some of the ground, we can see the character's face, we can see their body. What I'm going to do is kind of draw like over these with a much more simplified version. And let's just start with like the head and the body. So the head, we're just going to pick a color. Maybe just pick like this blue. And this is just going to be a representation of what we can see of the character's head from this angle. And when we generalize like this, it's going to let us think about this in more abstract terms. So there's the head, and then body will be underneath, and we'll pick a different color for that. We can pick maybe this dark red, and we'll put the body here. We'll go a bit darker. Okay, maybe we'll take this layer that's got our character on it and make it a bit more transparent. Okay, that's looking pretty much right. Maybe even a bit like this. And then from here, I want to do the arms as well. Front arm, and then we'll do a back arm as well. Now, if you've watched any of my animation videos, you'll know why I'm doing this. Essentially, this is how I mock up an animation. When I do any kind of animation, I'm effectively thinking about it just with shapes first. And this lets it, like I said, be more malleable. Lets you make changes more quickly. And I'm picking these colors for contrast. It's not for any aesthetic reason. It's just so that I can see what I'm doing. I'd like to break down each of the perspectives, and I want to be able to annotate them. So in this case, this is like, I'll give this a new tag, we'll call it, let's use the cardinal directions that I was talking about earlier. So we'll call this like southeast. And then this is going to be new tag, northeast, northwest. This one will be called southwest. And now we're just going to take all of these new layers that we've created and copy and paste them, and then modify them to make this fit. So now I've recreated the blobs for these sprites, and I'll be able to animate them now. If you haven't come up with your character details, usually what I would do is just draw an idle or a T-pose or something that's just representative of the character's proportions and dimensions, and then I go straight into this sort of blob thing. So normally I wouldn't have 4 different directions, but for the sake of not lying to you, I did have these already set up. So we have our 4. The next are the toward and away and side to side. So I'm also going to create those now. Okay, and then we've got southwest. So the next one's going to be south, just south. And then this one's going to be just east. This one's going to be just north. And this one's going to be just west. Right now these are frames, but they're going to be entire animations, right? And for the sake of the animations, we actually don't need any of the west ones. So we can actually just delete these, because these are the 5 that we actually need. So we're going south. We're not currently looking south, so we should make this character now face us. So I'm just gonna try to think about evening out all of these discrepancies, and I want to come kind of halfway. I think this color here is a little too bright. Maybe we'll go a little bit darker. So on this one here, we're going to bring everything and flatten it out, right? Because we're facing the camera directly now. Maybe give it a little bit of perspective, because we're sort of still in that top-down space. And especially at this level of detail, like, you definitely have time to play around with this stuff and just find something that you like. You know, it might take you a little bit to land on something that you're happy with, and that's okay. That's fine because we're not really investing that much time into these frames, right? It's just blobs at this point. So as long as you can try to visualize what you want and make a decision about whether or not you're sort of like getting there or not, then it's fine. So let's just use that for front. So this is south. Does that look normal? I think we want to maybe like have the legs spread out a bit further. Cool. So now we've got this, Now we need east. So now we're going to draw this character totally from the side, which means we probably won't see this arm and we probably won't see this leg. And this is something I'm much more familiar with. The actual proportions are going to be something like this. So if you think about, the character standing on like a platter, if the character's standing here and their feet are coming up like that, then their feet are going to be further up in terms of like the pixels, like up here. If we were to then rotate that character, well, now their feet are like here and here. This foot's come down, right? As we rotate around. So that's kind of what we're replicating here by making sure that this is higher than this, right? The foot comes down as we rotate, and this one here should be like this, I think. And it might be nice to actually show like the top angle of this, just to show that we're not totally side on. This is something where I'm just using like a second color on one of these shapes to train my eye into remembering that we're not looking at the character dead side on, we're actually above the character. And so we would see this line here, this shape. This is where the light is hitting the top of the shoulders, right? If this was just flat, it makes us think that we're totally side on, but now this kind of like represents that extra edge where the shoulder is created. Okay, and hypothetically you could go a step further and put this here as well, and that might help you too. So if you need it. And then now for north. So north is a lot like south. So the legs will kind of be exactly the same, to be honest. It's just that they're flipped. So it might be nice to just make sure that we're reviewing that every now and again. The body will be basically the same. And if it helps you, it might be worth, going through the motion of also just showing like where the head face is. So like, if it helps.
Animals in the first place. But it was around this time that I competed in Ludum Dare. I'd recommend you to check that video out afterwards if you haven't already, but editing that took quite a while and I did have to do some study for exams. After a few weeks though, I was back in business. Attacking right now is basically just swinging your sword and dealing damage, and it uses the same animation as the pickaxe, but oh well. I do plan to add more intricate combat systems after the demo, perhaps with randomized loot, ranged weapons, mage weapons and so on, but for now it's just swords because I cannot be bothered. Next anyway, I made these fancy health bars, which was actually surprisingly complicated. For the main sprite, I
Hello everyone, Carp here and welcome to
For a game that revolves around fishing and water, why does my water look absolutely horrible? Scattering with particles on the X and Y. Quick and simple. The actual last step is to make the shoreline move. I'm gonna warn.
It all started with a simple prototype, a line puzzle. You can draw infinitely long lines from point A to B, and he saw it and he went, oh no. The style that you have for Puzzle Dungeon just doesn't fit with Virtual Cottage or Cats organized neatly. It's not like we couldn't have seen this coming, editor, until then. Levels looked 2 days ago versus how they will hopefully look this afternoon.
Hey, what's up guys, it's Ben Monk, and if you're seeing this, it means that Slime, what is now known as, I made a bunch of updates in finding a guaranteed spawning boat room. They now had to search for a boat room which would randomly generate throughout the level and require a more adventurous playstyle. I also tweaked the slime health system depending on their on slime people. I had genuinely no clue what I was doing. I didn't know what a C# class really was. I didn't know that functions could ever.
Hey everyone, it's Landon here. I'm back. It looks like they came forward and then in. Should be even longer. Worked on the past because I already have it right up in the center of the player. Maybe rotate it accordingly to where the player is, or I can create a different animation for each angle depending on.
Hey, Noah here. In this video, I'll go over a design technique that can help create more picturesque spaces, whether you're creating games or designing buildings. I'll also give some updates on how we're progressing with Chef RPG. Jumping right in, I want to create a new map. This new map
Scrambling.
Two years ago, I sat down at my PC open game. I wanted to keep the scope of the game small and simple, which worked great as you can see, since the past taught me how important it is to stay realistic with the project. Nonetheless, I sat down and started planning a bit before getting to work. There were some aspects I wanted to have settled before starting the game's development. The genre was pretty clear from the start. The crafting part was going to be pretty straightforward. You gather resources throughout the world and can process and craft them into new ones, or build structures with them that allow further processing and crafting. But the exploration was where I expected things to get tricky. You see, normally when it comes to exploration in video games, it's always associated with huge AAA title worlds that are filled to the rim with detail and content. But as a solo developer developing the game in my free time, I don't have the resources for that. I wanted the game to be a pixel art game, but I also wanted the world to have a 3D feel to be more immersive. My first idea was making the game actual 3D and using a pixel art shader when rendering it to the screen. I actually ended up creating a little test prototype for that approach. The problem was that I had absolutely no experience when it came to creating 3D assets, so I would have to spend hundreds of hours of making 3D models before reaching a quality level that I was happy with. But over the last years, I had collected hundreds, if not thousands of hours making pixel art for my other projects. So I decided to go with isometric pixel art. It provided the mix of pixel art style with the three-dimensional depth that I wanted the game to have, while I didn't have to learn a completely new way of making game assets. Before I continue, I wanted to mention that if you like what you see and you want to support the project, consider wishlisting Isocore on Steam through the link in my description. I would really appreciate that. So I sat down on my PC and got to work. I started by creating some basic game art so that I had something to work with. Some blocks, a tree, and a basic player sprite. The second step was to create the player and get it moving. I created a tile map, filled it with some basic tiles, and wrote a simple character controller. But WASD felt incredibly weird because of the isometric perspective. I tried a bunch of different key combinations, but nothing felt natural to control. After trying a bit around, I ended up implementing an A-star path to make the player able to interact with objects in the scene. And of course, a simple inventory for the materials dropped by the objects. Now that you could run around the world and interact interact with objects, I can step forward, and I finally had a wish list by not having a Steam page for the game yet, if I'm going to keep it. The game is not supposed to be a fighting game, so mobs are not that present, but you do encounter some while exploring, adding a tiny bit of danger and difficulty. Also, some monster drops are needed for certain recipes, ensuring that the player can't just always avoid them. As I told you, I was using the old pre-made chunks to generate the world at first, but that was starting to become an issue, make the world feel more interesting. At the same time, I added biomes to make the world feel more varied. After the latest video about the topic, I got contacted by Mochikano. She's an artist that has been helping me out by providing some game art, giving me more time to work on the development. She's an awesome artist, so if you want to check her out, I linked her in the description. Having more time for development, I used it to tackle some often requested changes. One of the most common pieces of feedback I received was about the grid and the camera shake. Many people felt the grid was too rigid or distracting, and that the camera shake was uncomfortable. I've since made both of these fully adjustable in the settings, allowing players to customize their experience. The bigger changes that I made include implementing all of the biomes into one singular overworld, adding farming to the game, and replacing the building menu with the overworked inventory, which handles all of the building and items now. In general, I've spent the last couple of weeks working through a long list of points, making the game feel more complete. There's still a lot to do, but once that's done, I'm planning on releasing a little demo version on Steam. So this has been the 2-year development of my project. I know that for 2 years it's not that much to show for, but I am more than happy with it. But first and foremost, this would not be able without you guys. The support for this project has been an incredible motivator, and all of the people engaging in the comments is a huge help to figure out what people like and what I can improve. So I just wanted to say thanks to all of you. As always, if you have ideas, critics, or anything else, leave it in the comments. If you enjoyed the video, please consider liking and subscribing, and don't forget to wishlist Isokoro on Steam. Either way, I hope you have a great day, and see you in the next one. I wanted to mention that if you like what you see and you want to support the project, consider wishlisting Isokoro on Steam through the link in my description. I would really appreciate that. So I sat down on my PC and got to work. A year ago, but I quickly lost interest on. That was until I recently discovered this channel by a very talented guy who is developing a beautiful 3D pixel art game. This gave me the idea to do something similar with my game and give it a little glow up. So for a little context, my game has been a 2D isometric pixel art game on a grid-based world, which means that all the sprites are two-dimensional and it makes the game look a little flat and boring. So let's change that with some 3D lights. Well, kind of. It is obviously not possible to use a real 3D lighting system on two-dimensional sprites. However, this is where a little trick called normal maps comes in. A normal map is basically just a second texture that gets slapped onto the original, but it contains information about which part of the sprite is facing into which direction. This is done by just taking the sprite and coloring the certain areas with these colors. Now that the engine knows where each part of the sprite is facing, we can use this in combination with the 2D lighting system, which Unity thankfully already comes with. And as you can see now, the light does not illuminate the entire sprite smoothly, but actually creates a 3-dimensional effect. For the nighttime setting, this works perfectly, but during the day I use something called a global light. This type of light does not have an origin, and by that illuminates all the sprites in the scene equally. So I had to come up with a little trick. To achieve the effect of sunlight, I created an extra rendering layer which only targets the objects in the world. Now I created a sprite light which rotates around the camera to highlight the object in sight. So the only thing missing now are shadows. For that, I created a prefab that I could attach to every object that I wanted to cast a shadow. This prefab then just gets the sprite of the object as soon as the scene starts, rotates it by 45 degrees on the x-axis, makes it black, and turns the opacity down. Now the only thing to do is update the position and the rotation based on the sprite light that we've created earlier. So finally, Here's a little comparison for the before and the after. Thanks for watching.
Looking better already. Let's base and see what happens. And I think the bushes could be a bit brighter. I think they're a bit of an eyesore. Something about them. Not sure. Not sure what it is. I just don't really like them. I think they're just a bit noisy. Just too many shapes, I suppose. I thought when I was working on them that maybe having that many shapes would make them stand out as something that you can't stand on. But as I look at it, I don't think it really adds that much. It's starting to look nice though. But the palm tree definitely fits. The rocks definitely fit. I love the rocks. Cool. There you have it. That's me doing some work on a Saturday afternoon. We got some trees done. I some
have a
sandstone
feeling
rocks,
that
and, I will be making an isometric game for Ludum Dare. I don't know. I don't know how far I'll take that idea. It's just something that I really want to explore and experiment with. So if I can think of a game that fits with the theme when Ludum Dare comes out, then everyone increasing the shadow intensity. Now you can use the render facility other than it's this little spot near his feet. Now you want to make sure that all of your lights in the game allow shadow casts. So you want to do that by increasing the shadow intensity. Now, if we take our character and we move it over to those lights, you can see he actually casts a little shadow. Isn't that fun? So there you have it. Now, you know how to make 2D, isometric, lit tile sets in Unity. And
Open worlds. A beautiful possible to create large worlds with comparatively little effort. Before, I was generating the world by loading a pre-made chunk from a pool based on a noise function. This means that my freedom for creating the world was limited by whatever the chunk diameter was. Creating bigger structures like lakes and forests was not efficiently possible.
Animals in the first place. But it was around this time that I competed in Ludum Dare. I don't want to bore you.
That way. So I had to get away from loading the world in pre-made chunks and start generating every aspect of the world separately.
Marcus here, and in this video I want to show you guys the steps to set up top-down 2D style combat for a Unity game using the Unity 2022 editor. So this is sort of a follow-up to a crash course video that I published on my channel about a month ago. So I'll have games a copy. This is the added benefit of being able to specifically specify the exact collider on the game object that you mean to use. Sometimes it's possible to have multiple colliders, and you would want to make sure that the right one is selected, rather than just using get component collider 2D, which might grab the first one in the list and not the actual one you wanted to use. So that's about it for the limitations of this bit right here. And because we are manually assigning it, we can just do a if, and because we no longer need the start script to find the sword collider, we can just put a little bit in here to check that it is not null when the script starts, and we can log if swings are actually connecting with the slime there. I'm gonna take the game mode out of being maximized, so let's edit the damage play. See that when I'm gonna set play on the animation, so you can see that for that single frame, the box collider is enabled. So the reason why on-trigger enter is not actually activating is because on-trigger enter is looking specifically for a circle collider that's set to trigger. But for an enemy like a slime, we'd want that to be a non-trigger collider, because we do want physics to occur on this slime, such as being pushed away by the sword. So we need to change the function that we're adding right here. So the function we actually need to put in is on collision enter 2D. So this is going to be a rigid body collider that is not set too much in. And so this game side, you can see nothing happens, but actually if we go over to the left, you can see the box collider already hit, so that should be disabled at this point. But the box collider is actually able to and off. So I hit play, look around like this, slime, and by default, and on your prefab as well. So that way, it'll only actually be enabled once you swing the sword, and swinging this when it's gonna minus equal the damage. Okay, that needs a variable type. So you could do float or integer, depending on whether you want to allow decimal.
What's going on, fellow game developers? My name is Tylerpots, and in today's video, create player respawn. So what we're going to do, we're not going to actually respawn a player in this video, but I'm just adding in this debug log so we know once we lose all our health.
Hey, I'm Pen USB Mike, a pixel usually now, so let's go ahead and you want it to fade real quick, especially this one here.
What's going on, Wolfpack? And the objects Y, and that will give us the amount new 50. Oh, we actually need to go to our canvas and also change it to scale with screen size and set its base to 1920 by 1080. Start our game. Download the current version of the team. If our guy's chasing us, we can quickly fire some arrows at him to knock him back, hit him, damage him, or we can charge one up as he's chasing us, and if he gets too close, we release it and blast him away. Now we're not going to add the damage to the end. Do a bit more functionality.
I spent over a year working on what I thought was my dream game. It was an action RPG and it was very ambitious.
But then I stopped. Now I'm working on a new project, a roguelike where you pissed off every single god from every mythology. You stack items and you create unique builds in order to fight off the waves of enemies and bosses. But why did I switch? Well, there are a lot of reasons why, and I'll go over all of them in this video. But right now, I'm going to jump back into development for my new roguelike project Myth. In the last video, I had just covered the first 25 days of work, and the game had a solid working game loop where you could buy items and fight enemies. And so in this video, I'm going to be spending another 25 days improving this base, adding new enemies, items, and mechanics, and then finally building the first boss fight. So let's get into it. Last video, I left off right after adding status effects and some UI for those status effects to the game. This framework should allow me to make lots of new effects and items in the future. And so on day 26, I improved it further, creating a small class called a stackable value. This is just a little data container that I can use to easily add values to item effects that stack. It just consists of a base value, a stack change value, and a stack method. But that's boring. Let's make some enemies. So on day 27, I started on the first new enemy, the Dai Tengu. Tengu are a sort of Japanese yokai. There are a bunch of different types, from Karasu Tengu, which are more crow-like, to Dai Tengu, which are the long-nosed red ones. Dai Tengu are smart, and they are often master swordsmen, but they can also be extremely cruel. I put at you. I don't plan on making these give you a poison status effects, although maybe a stronger version of the enemy could do that. So it turns out the Finding Mythology is making you a legendary. I worked on them to handle some extra behavior, which includes things like multiple things. For Ares, this will be a jump where he tries to land on a player, creating 2 wave projectiles from which you must also avoid. In order to program this attack, I had to reprogram the entire enemy movement system? Yeah. Up to now, I've actually not used Unity's physics for enemy movement. And while that was fine for basic flying, walking, and jumping, if I want to make Ares jump on your head, I need to do some physics calculations. And so my pseudo-physics aren't really going to cut it anymore. So on day 47, I reworked physics for all enemies, which was annoying, but it works pretty well now. I'll just need to make some more adjustments over time, but now I can finally make the jump attack. So on day 48, I completed the jump attack, using projectile motion calculations to make sure that it lands on the player, and I also made him slam down a bit, making it harder to dodge. And then whenever he lands, I spawn in the 2 projectiles. The next attack is a sword combo attack, where he just slashes a few times, moving forwards a bit with each one. And this is pretty easy to get the basic sub working. But on day 49, I finally got to making some art for Ares himself. It isn't great, but it sort of works, so now it's time to finish up the behavior for the attacks. I started on some animations and then fixed some bugs, and now the 2 attacks work pretty well. So I added shielding, which was pretty simple actually. The player attack just checks that the shield is closer to the player than the enemy is whenever it hits it, and if it is closer, then it blocks the damage and knocks the player back a bit. Finally, on day 50, I added a bunch of particles to shielding and attacking for Ares. And I also finally made a good door sprite for moving between the library and the battle stages, and made the shield move up whenever the player is above Ares. And the rest of the day was spent polishing the attacks, making Ares actually walk around, and making a new, somewhat better sprite for Ares. And finally, making a new attack. This attack has 2 parts. First off, Ares jumps to the right of the stage, and then he pulls out a spear and he throws it. I made his animation and code and stuff, and while it mostly works, it is still a bit glitchy sometimes. Right now, I think that the Ares boss fight is in a good place, but it still has some bugs and can use another attack or 2. But time is up for this devlog, so I'm already halfway to my 100-day deadline. At the 100th day, I will release a Steam demo for the game, which should be completely playable. At that point, I'll go into content mode, creating lots of new stages, enemies, bosses, and items, eventually leading up to a final release. But for the next 25 days, I'm going to finish up this boss fight and then start polishing up the UI, adding menus, and adding a few brand new mechanics. So subscribe to follow further development. Anyways, thanks for watching. Bye.
It is inevitable that after you've played enough video games, you get the thought of, hey, I want to make one of those, right? I want to do that. But the odds of you giving up along the way are insanely high. You will fail. You will probably suck. You will get stuck a lot. And you will think to yourself, why am I doing this? But guess what? That does not matter. You are meant to try and fail and try and fail and try and fail until you've tried and failed enough to where now you can participate in a game jam. Now you have a small portfolio of games that you've created. Now you feel like those bigger ideas you have, that dream game that maybe you've wanted to make this whole time, is possible. But in order to do that, you have to try and you have to fail. See, in order to make games, you have to make games. And that's scary. I know, that's terrifying, but simple games, small games. Maybe you're recreating Snake, or Space Rocks, or some other classic arcade game. A game that probably isn't your dream game. But that's the point. You don't have to worry about failure because you're not trying to make an amazing game right now. You're learning how to eventually make an amazing game. The goal is to progress the same that you would with any skill, not from 0 to 100, but taking small steps over time. If you're making your very first game and you're telling yourself that this will be your dream game and you have this big cool idea you want to execute, I'll tell you right now that your odds of success are very low. If you're jumping right into that complicated idea, you're basically telling yourself you want to learn piano and then the first song that you learn is Rush E. Now, is that possible? Sure, maybe you're like Toby Fox and one of the first games that you ever start is going to become Undertale. But by taking that risk, you're missing out on a lot. The human brain thrives off of the feeling of making progress and the reward of feeling like you're learning and seeing yourself get better. Setting a really high ambition like making this dream game or learning this super hard song on piano, it does mean that you're passionate. But you don't know what it's like to make a game yet. You haven't fallen in love with the process. You aren't going to see yourself make progress for a longer time than you usually would if you started with small projects and worked your way up. Believe me, I know the feeling of having the idea for a game that is so fiery, it just feels like it consumes you, and that's all you can think about. That's all you want to do is just make it. You have this amazing storyline cooked up, well-designed characters you perfectly envision fitting into your world, gameplay mechanics that are genuinely unique and you know would be fun. I know what it's like to want nothing more than to just get started on that and make it. I've gone into a lot of projects with those ideas, but because I wasn't at Rush E level yet, they either ended up as small projects that just kind of taught me something, or they burnt me out from game development for months. For me, this manifested a lot through pixel art. When I had the idea for my very first game, I decided that I wanted to start by creating this beautiful aesthetic that would be inspired by one of my favorite albums, the first Glass Beach album. It's phenomenal, fire, definitely listen to it. It is a wonderful album, and the cover art is made up of these colors. So my plan was to make a game with that same color palette. I made all kinds of little dudes, random pieces of furniture, tile sets, and then eventually I got an idea for a different game. So I found a different color palette and made a bunch of art for that game. This would happen again and again with different game ideas, different album arts, until eventually I just got really good at pixel art, but none of that had translated into making any games. I'm not mad about it. I'm really happy that I learned to do pixel art and focused on that, but part of why I spent so much time doing it is because it was a way for me to put off doing the actual coding. I could keep coming up with new ideas, new themes, new styles, and it was very fun, but it took me a long time to actually finish any games, even tiny ones. If I can do it with pixel art, then I know that I can at least do it with anything, and it's just a matter of what I put the time into. The things that I want to do, or the things that I should do to actually make a video game. Game development is hard. It's a million skills in one, and it's not just that, but it's a million skills you have to manage and keep organized. Now, if you're like me, and you enjoy that management side or the more creative side of making a video game, so the artwork, the design, the story, you will have to learn to hold yourself back. Making games is a creative process, don't get me wrong, but making the game, as in physically assembling it, building it, coding it, is the backbone of everything. When I get the idea for a game nowadays, I have to physically hold myself back from daydreaming the entire story, making all the art, defining a style, because as important as those things are, nothing is as important as implementation. I have so many fleshed out game ideas that I never did anything with because I developed the idea so much without stopping to make any of it. And by the time that I was ready to actually start developing, I was burned out, I was bored, I didn't want to think about it anymore. And that's why I say small projects are so important. Come up with a cool game idea, but once you have the basis for what mechanics are driving your gameplay and why it'd be fun, go make that, okay? Go code that. Maybe follow a few tutorials to give yourself a point of reference. And then when you're done with that, then you can worry about the art and how much more you want to add, how deep the rest of the game should go. Learning to control the scope of your game is usually something that you learn by doing, by setting a bar too high, by trying to learn Rush E too soon. There's a quote out there from a wise man on Reddit. Someone who's so wise, I don't remember where I saw this quote or who exactly said it, but it goes along the lines of, make a game that you think will take you a week to make, and it'll end up taking you a month. Then make a game you think will take you a month, and it'll end up taking you a year. In other words, go for something simple, because even something simple is going to end up being a challenge. Your game ideas will probably flesh themselves out more as you make them. So if you can start with like a sentence or two long description describing what base mechanic is driving the gameplay of your game, I think that's all you need.
I spent over a year working on what I thought was my dream, a much larger scope than that. The other is the dwarf just being a combination of two other enemies. He's probably my favorite I've made so far, as he's just really fun to watch run around. And on day 36, I switched from just making new enemies to finally upgrading the shop. I made lots of new chest sprites. These chests have many categories, from damage to movement to economy, and there are also big chests and legendary chests now. The big chests have an 80% chance of giving you a rare item and a 20% chance of giving you a legendary, while the legendary chests have a 100% chance of giving you a legendary. I also made a 2-choice shop now, where you can choose between 2 different items. I think these changes should give you a little bit more power over your build, and also just make the shop a bit more interesting. And on day 37, I continued to work on the shop, and I added a brand new mechanic, which I'm pretty proud of. You can choose one chest to lock, and this chest will stay in the shop between rounds until you either remove the lock or you buy it. So if there's a chest which you really want, but you can't quite afford, you can lock it in. I spent over a year working on what I thought was my dream game.
Over a year, and
it was
how
an
the
action
game
RPG
is now
and it was very
compared to what it
ambitious.
was when it
But
first
then
started
I
is
stopped.
crazy.
Now I'm working
So I
on a
wanted
new
to show you
project,
all
a
of the
roguelike
progress
where you
that I
pissed off every single god from every myth. And on day 41, I started a new second
Jellyfields is a
thing,
remake
but
of
I
a game I
eventually
was
wanted to turn
making
this
over
first stage
5
into Mount
years
Olympus,
ago called
which will be the
Slime
first.
Game. In that game, you help the jelly survive by doing and when it ever make a jelly fields. I decided to theme the game around the wonder of traveling when going on vacation. My fiance and I had just won our very first vacation. Ship ever got to 0, the jelly would leave and the game would end. The jelly could also lose friendship in other ways. In the rocky retreat biome, boulders could fall and hit the jelly and damage its friendship, and I wanted there to be biomes that were more dangerous than others. I realized this made no sense though, because I wanted to create a relaxing game, and then I added super stressful and annoying mechanics into it, so things like that were removed. The world also became more and more living as time went on. There's weather, birds, look at this very cool shell and work on balance for it, but this first one, Partifer, is actually based for this biome, which I think will be very fun. And I also
you